everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So let's talk for a second about Home Alone. When Home Alone came out, I was at the absolute perfect age for a kid that would regard Home Alone as an absolute masterpiece and as a cinema classic and as a very, treasured part of my childhood. But when I left the cinema, I had seen the movie back in the days, I wasn't too fond of it. I thought that it had a boring, long build up to a arguably quite fun and whimsical, cartoonish, violent showdown between the Wet Bandits and Kevin McAllister. But at the same time, I thought it was a bit boring and, spent a lot of time with these heartfelt moments with the old guy and all that stuff. But fine, it was an okay movie, and when I rewatched it years later, I said to myself, this is a pretty damn okay movie, and I can understand why people think of it as a modern classic, but it's just not for me, guys. But one thing that I was incredibly certain of when I left the cinema was, of course, they're not going to do a sequel to this one, are they? Well, it turns out they have done a bunch of sequels to, Home Alone. Some of them have been absolutely atrocious, and one of them has actually been quite decent. But we are going to take a look at today one of the most ludicrous sequels that I have ever seen. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. By the way, let's talk about that thing for a second. It's a lie, people. The title is a lie. He is not home alone. He is away alone because he's in New York, because the McAllisters lives in Chicago. So the title should be Away Alone, Lost in New York. But he isn't really lost, is he? Wake up, people, the title is a lie. It's a lie! Christmas again in the McAllister household, and they're going to celebrate Christmas outside of Chicago once again. How? Well, they're not going to France this time, they're going to Florida. Well, because it worked so well the last time, it's probably going to work equally well this time. Well, we shall see about that. Now, to be fair to this movie, they're not forgetting Kevin this time. He actually gets separated from them at the Chicago airport and accidentally boards the wrong plane. While the rest of the McAllister clan goes to Florida, he ends up in New York. It should also be mentioned that the night before they go, Kevin and Buzz have this gigantic fight, and as always the McAllisters prove themselves to be the absolute assholes that they are, and sides with Buzz, leaving Kevin wanting, to celebrate Christmas alone again. But as we all know, they will reconcile in the end, but Kevin will do something and, will make them, shout, Kevin! Like Alvin! From Alvin and the Chipmunks, but that is a story for another time. So, Kevin has, however, Dad's money and his Visa card, so he isn't really without a plan. So he checks into the Plaza Hotel in New York, where he also runs into a cameo from Donald Trump. It's a weird little cameo considering that Trump only really has one line, which he kinds of flubbers, and was that really the best take they got from him? Or, was he so busy that he couldn't, do another take? Or did they think that that was a good take? It looks so weird because it looks like Trump wants to be anywhere except at this movie shoot. Weird. But enough about that for now. So he checks in there and he, takes part in all the glorious things that you could experience in New York in the early 90s. It's pretty damn magical when it comes to the Christmas spirit of New York. But the Christmas spirit may not last because the Wet Bandits are back. And they have escaped from jail, and their idea is basically to lay low for a while they're, figuring out their next score. Arizona? Marv says. That was actually one of the few really funny lines in that movie. We'll get to why that Marv's comment about Arizona is one of the very few actually funny lines in that movie later, because we're also going to have to talk about the fact that they do change their minds about, doing burglaries and stuff like that, because they are going to rob a toy store for some reason. And Kevin feels that it is his obligation to defend the whole thing. We'll get to why that is completely ludicrous also in a little bit of a while, because we are of course going to have to talk about this thing first. This movie makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The first movie, how ludicrous that scenario was, I could kind of buy the concept of why Kevin didn't do X, Y, and Z, you know, to fix the situation. And in this movie, however, it feels like, well, if you just did A, B, or C, this whole thing could be resolved immediately. And I understand that you have to suspend your disbelief in order to, you know, enjoy movies every once in a while, but sometimes things are just so out of the blue insanity that you just go, but why? And when you think too much about these things, you're just realizing that this movie kind of sucks. The biggest problem this movie has, that it is actually a rehash basically of the first movie, but it is even longer. Home Alone 2 clocking in at 2 hours is absolute insanity, because they basically have plots for maybe 45 minutes, but they just stretch it out to the point where you go, come on, can't we just get to the good stuff already? Thank God we have Rob Schneider then. That's a line you don't say every day, but he's actually kind of funny in this movie. He works at the Plaza Hotel together with this movie's absolute saving grace, Tim Curry. And when Tim Curry does his impression of the Grinch, it's one of cinema's unsung little fantastic moments. I love that sequence, it's absolutely delightful, and actually the entire staff of the Plaza is actually quite funny and probably are involved in, you know, the funniest, you know, sequence in this movie. Because we all know where this is going. The wet bandits, of course, run into Kevin, who then, you know, finds out about their plans, and then is going to lure them to, you know, a house that belongs to some, you know, long-distance relatives of his, where he spends 3 fucking hours setting up all of these traps and waits for the wet bandits. Okay. In the first movie, it kind of made sense why he made all these traps to defend his own house against people who was going to come in and, you know, burglarize the whole thing. In this case, he went into the store, he talked a little bit with the owner, who is this very nice man, and that was it. He knows where they're going to, you know, attack the place. He knows when they're going to do it. And his plan is basically set off the alarm, lure them to another location, and then bring biblical vengeance upon them, because Kevin basically transforms himself into an absolute sociopath for the last section of this movie. Throwing bricks at poor Mar from 3-story windows instantly should kill him and crack his skull open, you know, 3 or 4 times. But, you know, considering the amount of punishment the wet bandits take, they get lead pipes to the face, exploding kerosene, and, you know, the enormous amounts of head trauma that they are sustaining. They're basically immortal gods at this point, but they find this more of a nuisance rather than, you know, things that should mortally wound them and, you know, put them 6 feet below. And Kevin didn't need to do this. They just had to shoehorn in this thing because we need to do exactly the same thing we did in the last movie, but it is so contrived and it's so shoehorned in that I just went a little bit, but why? Why are you torturing this man in this brutal fashion? You're frightening me, Kevin. You're going to turn into a serial killer or something like that. Now, it should be mentioned that it is so fun to see these enormous amounts of cartoon violence that, you know, they actually do basically the same thing as they did in the last movie, but it is jacked up to 11. It is almost like the writers of this movie said, okay, we're going to do basically the same thing as we did in Home Alone. We're just going to jack this up to 11, and then we're going to, you know, marinate it in amphetamine or something like that, because everything is so ludicrously violent and so enormously over the top that you go after a while, this is insane. Thank God at least that it takes up a bigger portion of the movie than it did in the first movie. So we at least have a lot of cartoonish violence to enjoy, because it was quite fun. Now, the biggest problem, apart from the very, very bloated runtime, is of course the fact that they're basically doing the same sequences again. The same types of jokes, the same types of tropes, and the same types of, you know, storyline that they did from the first movie, but it is not as good, and the jokes doesn't work very well, except of course for the Plaza staff, who was actually quite funny. And, you know, there was here and there a couple of jokes that I kind of think worked, but for the most of it, it was just pretty uninspiring. And we also have another one of these misfits that is misunderstood that Kevin befriends and, you know, helps in a certain way, you know, the bird lady. But she's nowhere near as interesting or as cathartic as it was with the old man. Just ask George Costanza about that. So it is the lesser of a movie, and it is too long, and it makes no sense, and it is kind of a snooze fest until we get to the violent finale. It is still not a terrible movie, but it's a very underwhelming movie. And I just remember when I saw this movie, if I would have had a watch, I would have, you know, looked at it. Come on, can't we get to the violent stuff now? So, should you see this movie? If you really liked the first movie, I think you will like this movie almost as good. If you didn't like Home Alone 2 and think it is an overrated movie, I think you will find this movie to be quite a chore to get through. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It will be just between you and me. My favorite movie in the Home Alone series is Home Alone 3. Why? The worst part of any Home Alone movie is usually the build-up phase. The best part of a Home Alone movie is the cartoony violence. Home Alone 3 has the advantage of having almost 40% of its entire runtime being dedicated to punishing the villains. And we have 4 villains in this movie, so there is a variety to have. That is why I think that movie is the best. It may not be a cinematic masterpiece, but neither is the first one in my opinion. And that is a hill I'm willing to die on. Because the build-up phase is always the most boring thing about these movies. We have to get to the, you know, punishing the villains part before it gets actually fun. Except, of course, for the horrendously awful, you know, last movie, Home Sweet Home Alone, I think it was called. Jesus Christ, that movie, makes this movie feel like an absolute, you know, comedic masterclass in comparison. By the way, couldn't you have made, you know, the finale of this movie take place at the actual Plaza Hotel, and where Kevin could have set up his elaborate traps in peace, and then we could have even involved Tim Curry and Rob Schneider, who could, you know, take part in the fun together with the Wet Bandits. And I don't know, I think that's a better idea than, you know, what they're ending up doing, because Kevin basically, you know, throws the brick through the window so that he sets off the alarm, and he calls the cops anyway after he done that, because he just wants to punish them. That was something that never bothered me when I saw this movie the first time, but, you know, almost 30 years later when I saw that movie, I, you know, realized, why isn't he calling the cops now? And when you as an adult start picking apart these kind of things, the whole thing just comes unraveled. So should you see this movie? No, I wouldn't do that. I think this is an underwhelming, very, very ludicrous, incredibly slow-paced comedy with jokes that rarely works, and when they do, are the lesser version of a cousin to that joke that came from the first movie. I like the ending, and, you know, after a while you just get, I want to see more punishment. And then you just realize that this movie is basically empty calories, but it is at least empty calories that looks okay, and at least has Joe Pesci and Tim Curry in it. So at least it has that going on for itself, but apart from that, this is not a movie I would recommend anybody to see, really. Home Alone 2 is probably the purest form of a rushed sequel that I've ever seen. Because the first movie was such an enormous hit that I do understand why they felt that they needed to strike while the iron was hot, but they should have done something else. Maybe they could have done, you know, the same scenario with somebody else. Did they really need Macaulay Culkin for a second movie, or could they have done with, you know, some other kid or something like that? I don't know. This is one of, you know, history's great unanswered questions. Nevertheless, Home Alone 2 Lost in New York gets 26 points. I think that as a comedy it isn't very funny, but as a movie with the most brutal PG physical comedy that I have ever seen, to the amount where, you know, Wile E. Coyote would say, hey pal, ain't taking that bump. It is a spectacular mess, and the end, you cannot look away from it. I also have to point out that the sequence where, you know, Kevin tricks them with some gangster movie nonsense that he does is also actually kind of funny. But except from that, there aren't that many jokes in this movie that actually works. This is a pretty wretched comedy when it comes around. So which movie is your favorite of the Home Alone movies? Comment below, and I'll see you next time from, well, so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.